My sister sat at the head of the mahogany table, swirling her vintage Cabernet while the whole family laughed at my expense. They called my portfolio cute, mocking my returns as mere coffee money compared to her multi-billion-dollar empire. I simply smiled and sliced my turkey. Under the table, my phone buzzed with a volatility alert. While they toasted to her genius, I was the only person in the room who knew her company was about to hit zero. My name is Sage Paul, and at 32 years old, I had officially mastered the art of becoming invisible while sitting in plain sight. I sat at the far end of the long, polished mahogany dining table, a location that felt less like a seat of honor and more like an exile to the kids' table. Despite the fact that there were no children present, the setting was my parents' sprawling estate just outside Denver, a place that smelled of pine needles, expensive floor wax, and aggressive desperation to impress. Above us, a crystal chandelier the size of a small hatchback glittered ominously, casting refracted light onto the charger plates rimmed in 24-karat gold. The turkey had been carved hours ago, yet the air was still thick with the scent of roasted sage and the heavier, cloying perfume of self-satisfaction. This was Thanksgiving, but in the Paul household, gratitude was a secondary emotion. The primary emotion was envy, followed closely by pride. My sister, Madison Paul, sat in the center of the table, flanked by our father on one side and her husband, Ethan, on the other, at 35. Madison was the sun around which this entire solar system orbited. She was the CEO of HelioCore Systems, a tech darling that had gone public 18 months ago and was currently trading at valuations that made seasoned analysts weep with joy. She wore a cream-colored cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my first car, and her hair was pulled back in a bun so severe it looked like it was holding her entire face together. "So, Sage," Madison said, her voice cutting through the ambient clinking of silverware. She didn't look at me. She was busy swirling a vintage Cabernet that my father had been saving for a decade. "Ethan was telling me you're still doing your little market thing. How is that going? Still playing with your apps?" The table went quiet. This was the ritual, the opening ceremony of my humiliation. I took a slow sip of water. "It is going well. Madison, the portfolio is up this quarter." Ethan snorted. He was a man who wore loafers without socks in November and had a job title at HelioCore that sounded important but meant nothing. "Portfolio," he repeated, chuckling as if I had told a joke. "That is adorable. You hear that? Logan? Sage has a portfolio." Logan, the chief financial officer of HelioCore, leaned forward. Madison had invited her entire C-suite to Thanksgiving. It was a power move, a way to show that business never sleeps, not even for turkey. Logan was a man with teeth too white and a soul too gray. "Retail investing is a fun hobby," Logan said, offering me a pitying smile. "It is good for buying Starbucks or maybe a new handbag. Keeps the mind sharp." "Exactly," Madison chimed in, finally deigning to look at me. "I think it is great you have a hobby. Sage, really, not everyone is built for the high-stakes world. Someone has to keep the ground level steady." Sage has always been very practical. My mother, Elaine, added from the other end of the table. She smiled at me, a soft, wounding expression that was meant to be kind but felt like a slap. "Not everyone can be a visionary like you. Madison, Sage likes safety. She likes small, manageable things. There is no shame in that." "Right," my father, Gregory, grunted in agreement. He looked at Madison with a hunger in his eyes, a vicarious greed for the power she wielded. "Madison dares to think big. That is why she is on the cover of magazines. Sage, you are comfortable, and that is fine." Comfortable, practical, small. The words piled up around my plate like cold side dishes. I sliced a piece of Brussels sprout with surgical precision. They saw a woman who worked a mid-level job at a data analytics firm called Northline Metrics. They saw a woman who lived in a rented apartment and drove a 4-year-old sedan. They saw a failure. What they did not see was that for the last 7 years, I had been building a fortress. They did not know that my hobby was actually a Shark Tank where I navigated complex derivatives and forensic accounting strategies. They did not know that the small inheritance from Grandma, which Madison had blown on a luxury vacation and a down payment for a penthouse, had been compounded in my hands through cold, hard discipline into a sum that would make Ethan choke on his stuffing. But I said nothing. I just nodded. "I enjoy the process," I said quietly. The process? Sasha, the COO, laughed. She was a sharp-edged woman who treated conversation like a contact sport. "Honey, the process is for people who do not have algorithms doing the work for them. We have bots that trade faster than you can blink. You are bringing a knife to a nuclear war." Speaking of nuclear, Harold, the company lawyer, interrupted, waving a turkey leg like a gavel. "Madison, the valuation on the pending merger with EtherTech, it is going to push the stock to $300 a share by February. I am telling you, the regulatory hurdles are a joke. We will crush them." The conversation instantly shifted away from me, pivoting back to the only topic that mattered, HelioCore. For the next 40 minutes, I was treated to a masterclass in corporate hubris. They threw around terms like synergy, market penetration, and aggressive revenue recognition. They spoke of acquiring competitors as if they were buying groceries. "We are projecting a 40% year-over-year growth in the cloud sector," Logan said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, though he was loud enough for the whole table to hear. "The street expects 20. We are going to blow the roof off the earnings call." "It is all about the narrative," Madison said, her eyes gleaming. "People buy the future. They do not buy the present. I tell them we are building the infrastructure of tomorrow, and they throw money at us. It is almost too easy." I looked down at my plate. It is almost too easy. That was the problem. I had been watching HelioCore. I had been watching them closer than anyone knew. I tracked their server traffic data using tools from my job. I scraped employee reviews. I monitored their supply chain manifests. The narrative Madison was selling was a skyscraper built on a swamp. The user growth numbers did not match the data usage. The churn rate was hiding in the marketing spend. They were borrowing from the future to pay for the present, and eventually, the bill would come due. "Sage." Madison's voice snapped me back to the room. She was looking at me again, her expression softening into something that resembled charity but tasted like poison. "I was thinking, I feel bad about you wasting your time with those little trading apps. You know we have a private wealth management division at HelioCore now? For high net worth individuals? The minimum buy-in is $5 million, Ethan pointed out quickly, guarding the gate. Madison waved a hand dismissively. "I can waive the minimum for family. Sage, why don't you liquidate whatever little positions you have, sell your Apple fractional shares or whatever, and give the capital to Logan's team? They can actually generate real alpha for you. It is Wall Street level management right here in Silicon Valley." The table went silent again, waiting for my gratitude. It was the ultimate crumb thrown from the master's table. "That is very generous," I said, keeping my voice even. "But I prefer to manage my own allocation. I like to know exactly what I own." A ripple of genuine laughter went around the table. It was not mean-spirited anymore. It was the laughter of adults watching a toddler try to do taxes. "Oh, Sage," Logan chuckled, shaking his head. "Rule number 1 of real wealth. You never manage it yourself. That is a poor person's mindset. You think you can beat the market? You think you can beat us?" "I think I understand my risk tolerance better than anyone else," I replied. "Risk tolerance," Madison repeated, rolling her eyes. "Sage, you are afraid of your own shadow. That is why you are still single and living in that apartment. You are so obsessed with not losing that you never win. Look at this room. Look at this life. Do you think I got here by being careful?" "We just want the best for you, honey," my mother added, patting my hand. "Madison is offering you a golden ticket. Don't let your stubbornness get in the way." "I am fine, Mom," I said, my grip tightening on my napkin under the table. "Really?" "Suit yourself," Madison said, turning away, bored. I try to help, and she acts like she is Warren Buffett. Some people just want to stay small. The conversation moved on. They toasted to the new yacht Ethan was ordering. They toasted to the stock price. They toasted to the genius of Madison Paul. I sat there, taking small bites of dry turkey, feeling the heat of their dismissal burn my cheeks. They saw me as a relic, a cautionary tale of mediocrity. But as I looked around the table, at Logan's arrogant grin, at Madison's frantic energy, at my parents' blind adoration, I realized something profound. I was not the one in danger. I was the only person in this room who was safe. They were leveraged to the hilt. Their identity, their net worth, their social standing, it was all tied to one ticker symbol. They were dancing on the edge of a cliff, convinced they were flying, and I was the only one who had bothered to look down and see the rocks. My phone, resting face down on the tablecloth next to my untouched wine glass, buzzed once. It was a distinctive vibration pattern I had set for high-priority alerts. I glanced at the screen, shielding it with my hand. Notification: Heliocore Systems, HCS. Alert: Unusual options activity detected. Institutional put volume spiking 300% above average. My heart hammered against my ribs. Someone else knew, or at least, someone else was beginning to suspect. The smart money was starting to bet against my sister. The first cracks in the dam were appearing. "Is that a text from a boyfriend?" Ethan teased, noticing me check the phone. "Or did your savings account earn 12 cents in interest?" "Just a spam message," I said, my voice steady, betraying nothing. I reached out and turned the phone off completely. I picked up my wine glass and took a long sip. The wine was excellent. It tasted like blood and victory. "So," I said, looking at Madison with a smile that reached my eyes for the first time that night, "tell me more about this merger. It sounds fascinating." Madison beamed, thinking she had finally cowed me into submission, finally impressed the dull little sister. She launched into a monologue about synergies and dominance. I listened to every word, cataloging every lie, every exaggeration, every piece of hubris. "Enjoy the dinner, Madison," I thought. "Enjoy the crystal and the gold, because the bill is coming, and you are not going to be able to pay it." 7 years ago. The dynamic of our family was codified in a lawyer's office that smelled of lemon polish and old paper. That was the day our grandmother's will was read. Grandma was the original matriarch, a woman of steel who had built the initial family wealth before my father expanded it. When she passed, everyone expected an even split. Instead, she left a legacy that would define the chasm between my sister and me for the rest of our lives. Madison received the voting shares of the family trust, the seat on the board, and the keys to the beach house in Malibu. The value was estimated in the mid-8 figures. I, on the other hand, received a check for $50,000 and a handwritten note that simply said, "Sage, you are the sensible one. Keep yourself safe." I remember the drive home that day. My father told me it was for the best. He said Madison had the fire needed to manage an empire, while I had the temperament for a quiet life. He told me to put the $50,000 into a high-yield savings account, or maybe a certificate of deposit. He told me to treat it as a safety net, a rainy day fund for when my modest ambitions inevitably hit a snag. That night, I sat in my small studio apartment and looked at the check. To them, it was a consolation prize. To me, it was seed capital. I did not put the money in a savings account. Instead, I went to work, not the kind of work my family understood, which involved shaking hands and signing deals, but the unglamorous, silent work of understanding how value is actually created. I was 25 years old, working as a junior analyst at Northline Metrics. It was a mid-tier data firm, the kind of place that processed boring, back-end numbers for logistics companies and server farms. My family thought it was a dead-end job for a girl who lacked spark. They did not realize that Northline Metrics was a library of secrets. At Northline, I learned that every company leaves a digital footprint that is impossible to fake. A CEO can go on television and claim sales are up 200%, but if the shipping data from their logistics partner shows flat volume, The CEO is lying. If a software company claims 10 million daily active users, but the server load data shows idle bandwidth during peak hours, the numbers are cooked. I became obsessed. I spent my days analyzing these discrepancies for clients, and my nights applying the same logic to the stock market. I took that $50,000 and opened a brokerage account that was entirely separate from the family's wealth management advisors. I did not want their fees, and I certainly did not want their judgment. For the first 2 years, I barely slept. I took online courses in forensic accounting. I learned to read a 10K filing like it was a murder mystery novel. I looked for the bodies buried in the footnotes, the changes in depreciation schedules, the off-balance sheet liabilities, the sudden shifts in executive compensation. I realized that the financial world was divided into 2 groups, the storytellers and the mathematicians. My sister was a storyteller. I decided to become a mathematician. I built a diversified portfolio. I bought companies that made boring, essential things, waste management, specialized insurance, industrial supply, companies with cash flows that I could verify against third-party data. I avoided the flashy tech stocks my father loved, the ones that burned cash to buy growth. I compounded my returns. 50,000 became 80,000. 80,000 became 150,000. I lived off my salary and reinvested every single cent of profit. I remember trying to tell my father about my strategy once, about 4 years ago. We were sitting on the patio, and I had brought a spreadsheet. I wanted to show him a correlation I had found between semiconductor supply chain delays and the revenue guidance of major auto manufacturers. I thought he would be impressed by the rigor of the work. He had glanced at the paper for 3 seconds before pushing it back across the glass table. He told me that I was getting lost in the weeds. He said that investing was about people, about gut instinct, about betting on the jockey, not the horse. He pointed to Madison, who was currently negotiating her first round of venture capital for HelioCore. He said Madison understood the art of the deal. While I was trying to turn the world into a math problem, he told me that my approach was too academic, too risk-averse. That was the last time I ever showed him a number. It was painful because Madison and I had not always been rivals. When we were children, we were inseparable. She was the loud one, the brave one, who would jump off the high dive, and I was the one who checked the water depth first. We balanced each other, but as we grew older, and the family spotlight narrowed its focus onto her, she began to believe her own press release. She stopped seeing me as a partner and started seeing me as an audience member, and when I refused to clap loud enough, she started seeing me as a critic. My skepticism of HelioCore systems did not start out of spite, it started out of habit. I had been tracking HelioCore since it was a private startup. I had access to the data. After all, when they launched their flagship enterprise software 3 years ago, Madison went on a media blitz. She claimed that 80% of the Fortune 500 companies were piloting the software. The valuation of the company skyrocketed based on that statement alone. But at Northline, I had access to the hiring data of those Fortune 500 companies. If 80% of them were adopting a massive new software ecosystem, they would have been hiring specialists to manage it. They were not. The job postings for HelioCore administrators were non-existent. Then came the IPO. The S-1 filing was a masterpiece of creative writing. It showed revenue growing in a perfect 45-degree angle. But when I looked at the back-end provider data, the companies that hosted HelioCore's cloud traffic, I saw something else. The data usage was growing. Yes, but at a fraction of the rate of the reported revenue. There are only 2 ways revenue grows faster than usage in a consumption-based model. Either you are raising prices drastically, which they were not, or you are booking revenue for services you have not yet delivered. I bought a small block of HelioCore shares right at the IPO. I did it partly to keep up appearances, so I could say I was supportive at family dinners, but mostly to get access to the shareholder materials that aren't always fully public. I held those shares. I watched them triple in value. My family mocked me for not buying more. They said I lacked conviction. They said I was leaving millions on the table because I was afraid to bet on my own blood. They were wrong. I wasn't afraid. I was waiting. I was waiting for the moment when the math would finally catch up to the story. In my experience, gravity is the only force in the universe stronger than a CEO's ego. I excused myself from the dinner table, the taste of the expensive Cabernet turning sour in my mouth. I needed air. I needed silence. I walked through the gilded hallway, past the portraits of my ancestors who looked down with stern disapproval, and slipped into the guest bathroom on the first floor. I locked the door and leaned back against the cool wood. Letting out a breath I felt like I had been holding since I arrived. The bathroom was larger than my kitchen at home, filled with the scent of lavender and money. I pulled my phone from my pocket and unlocked it. My thumb hovered over the brokerage app icon. This was my sanctuary. This was the one place in the world where I was not the disappointing younger sister, but a predator who knew exactly when to strike. I opened the app. The screen filled with green numbers. My diversified positions were holding steady, grinding out their reliable, boring returns. My net worth was sitting at a number that would have shocked my father into silence. A number achieved not by a lucky inheritance, but by 7 years of grinding discipline. Then I scrolled down to the bottom of the watch list. HelioCore Systems. The ticker symbol was flashing. It was not the usual fluctuation. My custom algorithm, the one I had coded late at night while eating takeout noodles, had flagged an anomaly. Watch closely. The tag read in bright red text, "Anomaly detected." I tapped into the details. The volume of put options, bets that the stock price would fall, had spiked in the last 48 hours. But it was not just the volume, it was the timing. These were large, block trades, executed with the precision of institutional money. Someone else had seen the cracks, someone big. The small investment that my sister had mocked over turkey and stuffing was about to become the most important financial instrument in my life. I wasn't just holding shares anymore. I was holding a front-row ticket to a disaster. I looked at myself in the vanity mirror. My face was calm, pale, unreadable. The face of a practical woman. The face of someone who saves for a rainy day. "Well, Madison," I thought as I washed my hands, drying them on a towel that was softer than my bedsheets, "the rain is coming." I turned off the screen, slipped the phone back into my pocket, and unlocked the door to rejoin the party. I had a role to play. After all, the supportive, clueless sister. I would play it until the curtain fell. The investigation did not begin with a whistleblower or a grand confession. It began with a discrepancy so small that 99% of the market missed it. It was a single pixel out of place in a high-definition photograph. I was sitting at my dual-monitor setup at Northline Metrics on a Tuesday evening. The office was empty. The hum of the HVAC system the only sound in the room. I had the quarterly earnings report for HelioCore Systems open on the left screen, and on the right, I had a raw data set from a third-party cloud infrastructure provider. This was not private data. Exactly. It was aggregated traffic reports that showed how much bandwidth major tech corridors were consuming. It was the kind of boring, back-end metric that nobody looks at unless they are trying to optimize server load. HelioCore claimed in their glossy PDF presentation that their daily active users had grown by 40% in the last quarter. 40% was a monstrous number. It was the kind of number that sends algorithms into a buying frenzy. But when I looked at the traffic data coming out of the server farms that hosted HelioCore's platform, the bandwidth usage was flat. It was physically impossible. It was like a trucking company claiming they had driven 1,000,000 miles, but their fuel receipts showed they had only purchased 10 gallons of gas. I felt a cold prickle at the base of my neck. In my line of work, we call this a divergence. In the criminal world, they call it a loose thread. I decided to pull on it. I spent the next 3 weeks living a double life, by day. I was the dutiful employee at Northline. By night, I turned my apartment into a war room. I used every skill I had honed over 7 years to cross-reference HelioCore's public claims against reality. I scraped the Apple App Store and Google Play Store for download rankings. If they had added 2 million users, they should have been in the top 10 business apps. They were ranked number 42, and slipping. I went to Glassdoor and LinkedIn. I wrote scripts to analyze the sentiment of employee reviews. Usually, when a company is growing at 40%, the employees are exhausted but ecstatic. They are talking about bonuses, expansion, and hiring sprees. The reviews for HelioCore were different. Engineers were complaining about shifting priorities and reorganization. Salespeople were leaving in droves after less than 6 months. I tracked the job postings. A hyper-growth company is always hungry for talent. HelioCore had frozen hiring in their engineering department, but was aggressively recruiting for enterprise account executives. The picture was forming, and it was ugly. The product was stalling. The customers were not using it, but the revenue kept going up. How? I dove into the financial statements, the dense 10K and 10Q filings that most investors skim over to get to the summary page. I stopped reading them like a sister and started reading them like a forensic pathologist examining a body. I found the answer on page 64, buried in a paragraph about revenue recognition policies. In the software world, if you sign a contract with a customer for 1 year of service, you are supposed to recognize that revenue slowly, month by month. If the customer pays you $12,000 in January, you book $1,000 in January, $1,000 in February, and so on. It is boring, but it is honest. HelioCore had quietly changed their policy. They were using a complex loophole regarding on-premise license delivery to recognize almost the entire contract value the moment the ink was dry. They were pulling future earnings into the present. They were eating tomorrow's lunch today. It was a classic channel stuffing maneuver, or something dangerously close to it. It meant that the massive revenue growth they were showing was not new business. It was just next year's business, looted to make this quarter look good. Once you start doing that, you cannot stop. You have to sign even more deals next quarter just to show growth on top of the cannibalized numbers. It is a hamster wheel that spins faster and faster until the hamster dies. But that was not the worst of it. I looked at their operating expenses. The cost of research and development had dropped significantly as a percentage of revenue. That should have been good news. It implies efficiency, but I knew they had not fired engineers. So where did the costs go? I found them hiding in the balance sheet, disguised as capitalized software development costs. Instead of treating engineer salaries as an expense that reduces profit right now, they were classifying those salaries as an investment in a long-term asset. By doing this, they moved millions of dollars of cost off the income statement, artificially inflating their profit margins. It is the accounting equivalent of sweeping dust under the rug and claiming the house is clean. It works for a while, until the rug gets so lumpy you trip over it. I sat back in my chair, the glow of the monitor illuminating my horrified face. I had read about this. This was Enron. This was WorldCom. This was the exact same playbook used by every corporate giant that ever imploded. They were putting lipstick on a pig and selling it to Wall Street as a supermodel. And my sister was the one holding the lipstick. I felt a wave of nausea. This was not just aggressive accounting. This was fraud. Or if it was not technically fraud yet, it was dancing on the razor's edge of legality with a blindfold on. I had to tell her. I texted Madison the next morning. We need to talk. Not about family stuff. Business. Urgent. She gave me a 20-minute window 3 days later, at a trendy coffee shop near her office. When I arrived, she was already there, typing furiously on her phone, wearing a suit that cost more than my rent. "Make it quick, Sage," she said without looking up as I sat down. "I have a board prep meeting in half an hour. Harold is breathing down my neck about the merger." I pulled a manila envelope out of my bag. I had printed the pages. I had highlighted the revenue recognition clause in orange and the capitalization tables in pink. I laid them on the table, smoothing the paper over the reclaimed wood surface. "Madison, I have been looking at the 10K, I said, keeping my voice low so the baristas wouldn't hear, and the cross-referenced server data. She finally looked up, raising an eyebrow. "You are still playing detective? That is cute." "It is not cute," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "It is dangerous. Look at this. You are booking revenue on incomplete deliverables. And look at the capitalization rate on the engineering salaries. It has jumped from 10% to 40% in 2 quarters. That is not sustainable. You are inflating net income artificially. Madison glanced at the papers for less than 2 seconds before pushing them back toward me. She laughed, a short, sharp sound that lacked any humor. "Sage, please," she said, taking a sip of her oat milk latte. "You are reading too many of those doom and gloom financial blogs. This is standard industry practice. It is called GAAP accounting, and we have auditors who sign off on this. Do you think you know more than Deloitte?" "Auditors sign off on what you show them," I countered, leaning in. "But the underlying mechanics are flawed. The user base is flat. Madison, I checked the server logs. You are showing growth on paper, but the product isn't moving. You are creating a bubble." Her eyes narrowed. The playful sisterly condescension vanished, replaced by the cold steel of a CEO whose authority was being questioned. "You have no idea how the big leagues work," she hissed. "It is about momentum. It is about capturing market share. We will grow into the valuation. Everyone does this. It is how the game is played. If you are too scared to understand leverage and forward projection, that is your problem. But do not come here and lecture me on how to run a billion-dollar company because you took an online course in accounting." "I am trying to protect you," I whispered. "If the SEC looks at this—" "The SEC has bigger fish to fry," she interrupted, standing up and gathering her purse. "I know exactly what I'm doing. And honestly, Sage, it is a little pathetic that you're trying to find holes in my success just to make yourself feel better about your own mediocrity." She walked out. She didn't look back. I sat there for 10 minutes, staring at the untouched coffee she had left behind. I tried one last time. That night, I wrote an email. It was 5 pages long. I stripped out the emotion and left only the math. I cited specific accounting standards. I linked to the disparity in the data. I calculated the potential write-down if they were forced to restate earnings. I sent it with a subject line: "Please read. Risk analysis." Her reply came the next morning. It was one sentence: "Sage, stay in your lane. I have got this." That was the moment the cord snapped. I realized then that I could not save her. You cannot save someone who is drunk on their own narrative. She believed the lie because she had to. The truth was too expensive. I closed my laptop. I walked into my kitchen and made a cup of tea. I felt a strange, cold calm settle over me. It was the feeling of a surgeon who realizes the patient is inoperable and steps away from the table. I was done being the concerned sister. From this moment forward, I was just a market participant, and the market does not have feelings. The market only has winners and losers. I went back to my desk. I opened the file on HelioCore one last time. I did not look at it with anxiety anymore. I looked at it with calculation. I picked up a red pen and circled a specific line in the footnotes of the annual report, a tiny sentence in size 8 font that most people would need a magnifying glass to read. "Revenue recognition for multi-year contracts is subject to significant management judgment." Management judgment, I whispered to the empty room. That was the key. That was the confession. That was the loose thread. "This," I said softly, tapping the screen, "is the thread that unravels everything." I turned off the lights. The screen glowed in the darkness, a beacon of imminent destruction that only I could see. I was ready to stop warning the captain about the iceberg and start building my lifeboat. The process of dismantling my loyalty to my sister began not with a bang, but with a series of limit orders executed in the quiet hours of the morning. For the next 2 weeks, I systematically sold off my position in HelioCore. I did not dump the shares all at once. That would have been amateurish. A sudden block sale of that size might have triggered an automated alert in the investor relations department, and the last thing I wanted was Logan or Madison asking why I was cashing out. Instead, I sold in small, jagged tranches, 200 shares here, 300 shares there, blending my exit into the daily noise of the market. It felt strange to watch the cash balance in my brokerage account swell. For years, those shares had been a symbol of family unity, a financial tether connecting me to Madison's success. Now, they were just digital numbers, cold and detached. I took every dollar I pulled out of HelioCore and moved it immediately into a company called Lumagrid Analytics. Lumagrid was everything Heliocore was not. It was a boring, unsexy competitor based in the Midwest. Their CEO was a 60-year-old engineer who wore ill-fitting suits and hated doing interviews. They did not have a flashy campus or a celebrity following. What they had was a balance sheet that was cleaner than a hospital operating room. Their revenue growth matched their server traffic perfectly. They paid a dividend. They were honest. My family would have laughed if they saw the trade. They would have said I was betting on a donkey when I could have been riding a thoroughbred. But I knew that when the storm hit, the thoroughbred would bolt, but the donkey would keep standing. Once I was fully divested, I faced the hardest decision of my life. I sat in my apartment one rainy Tuesday night, staring at the glowing interface of my trading platform. My finger hovered over the mouse. Selling my shares protected me, but it did not profit from the inevitable crash. To truly win, to prove that my hobby was superior to their genius, I needed to bet against them. I navigated to the derivatives tab. I pulled up the options chain for Heliocore. I was looking at put options. For the uninitiated, buying a put option is purchasing the right to sell a stock at a specific price by a specific date. It is an insurance policy against a disaster. If the stock crashes, the value of the put option explodes. It is the financial equivalent of betting that a house will burn down. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was my sister's house. I remembered the Thanksgiving dinner. I remembered the way Ethan had sneered at my coffee money. I remembered Madison's email. Stay in your lane. If I did nothing, they would crash, and I would just be the sister who survived. But if I made this trade, I would be the sister who saw it coming. I took a deep breath and entered the order. I bought a significant block of put options with a strike price 20% below the current market value. Expiring in 6 months, I did not bet my entire net worth. I was too disciplined for that. But I bet enough that if Heliocore went to zero, or even dropped by half, I would never have to work a day job again. Order executed. I sat back, my hands trembling. I felt a wave of nausea mixed with an electric jolt of adrenaline. It was done. I was now short Heliocore. The guilt came in waves over the next few nights. I would wake up at 3 a.m, staring at the ceiling, thinking, I am a traitor. I am betting on my own family's destruction. I imagined Madison's face when the stock ticker turned red. I imagined my father's confusion. I was effectively shorting my own last name. But then I would remember the management judgment clause in the footnotes. I would remember the capitalized software costs. I reminded myself of the first rule of the market. The market does not care about your feelings. The market cares about truth. Madison had chosen to build a castle on sand. I was simply betting on the tide coming in. It was not personal. It was physics. To silence the last of my doubts, I made an appointment with a securities lawyer named Robert. He was not one of the high-priced corporate sharks my family used. He operated out of a small, clutter-filled office in downtown, and he had a reputation for defending whistleblowers. I paid him for an hour of his time in cash. I sat across from his messy desk and laid out my situation hypothetically. If an investor analyzes public documents, I asked carefully, like 10K filings, public server data, and employee reviews on LinkedIn, and concludes a company is committing fraud, is that insider trading? Robert peered at me over his glasses. Did you speak to anyone inside the company who gave you non-public numbers? Did you see a draft of an unreleased earnings report? Did you hack their email? No, I said firmly. I only used what was available to anyone with an internet connection. I just connected dots that no one else bothered to connect. Then you are using the mosaic theory, Robert said, leaning back. You took public tiles and made a private picture. That is not illegal, young lady. That is just being smarter than the other guy. You are in the clear. And if I were to share this analysis, anonymously, with a journalist? He smiled, a dry, thin expression. The First Amendment protects the press, and whistleblower laws protect the source, provided you are not stealing trade secrets. If you are just pointing out where the bodies are buried in the public graveyard, you are doing a public service. I left his office feeling lighter. The legal weight was gone. Now, there was only the execution. I went to a public library 3 towns over, wearing a hoodie and a baseball cap. I used a computer in the back corner. I created a secure, encrypted email account. I had prepared a dossier. It was a 20-page PDF titled The Solar Eclipse: Why Heliocore Systems is Darker Than It Looks. It contained everything: the server traffic charts, the analysis of the revenue recognition loopholes, the comparison of their R&D capitalization versus industry standards. I stripped out any mention of my personal conversations with Madison. I kept it strictly professional, strictly data-driven. I sent the first copy to the Securities and Exchange Commission, filing it through their whistleblower portal. Then, I attached the file to an email addressed to Mara. Mara was a financial investigative journalist who wrote for a major wire service. She was famous for tearing apart unicorn companies. She was the one reporter Madison was terrified of, the one person my sister refused to grant an interview to. Dear Mara, I wrote, you have been asking why Heliocore's numbers look too perfect. The answer is on page 64 of their annual report. This analysis connects the rest of the dots. I am a concerned investor. Do not try to trace me. I hit send. Then I waited. The waiting was the hardest part. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. The stock price kept inching up. Madison went on another talk show, wearing a red power suit, talking about hypergrowth and paradigm shifts. My parents texted the family group chat with heart emojis every time she appeared on screen. I replied with a thumbs up, playing my part, while checking my put options, which were currently bleeding value as the stock rose. But then, the ripples began. It started in the quarterly shareholder meeting. Usually, these calls were love fests, where analysts threw softball questions. But this time, a junior analyst from a boutique firm asked a question that made my ears perk up. Can management clarify the discrepancy between the billings growth and the deferred revenue balance? The analyst asked. His voice was shaky, but the question was sharp. Logan, the CFO, stumbled. He gave a non-answer about seasonal timing and contract mix. It was a brush-off, but for the first time, I heard a hesitation in his voice. 3 days later, a niche accounting blog, not a major news site, but one read by short sellers, posted a short article titled Heliocore: Red Flags in the Cash Flow Statement. It didn't go viral, but it was shared on Twitter by a few influential traders. Then came the volume. I watched my trading screen like a hawk. The volume of put options on Heliocore started to climb again. It wasn't just me anymore. Other sharks were smelling the blood in the water. The price of the stock stalled, then dipped 1%, then 2%. It wasn't a crash yet, but the momentum was breaking. My phone buzzed. It was an email notification from the encrypted account I had set up. I opened it, my pulse racing. It was from Mara. To the anonymous source, the email read, I have verified your data with 2 independent forensic accountants and a former employee of the company. We are going to print. The story goes online tomorrow morning at 6. Make sure you are buckled in. I stared at the screen. The clock on my wall ticked loudly. It was happening. The stone I had thrown was about to start an avalanche. I closed my laptop and walked to the window of my apartment. The city lights of Denver twinkled in the distance, oblivious to the bomb that was about to go off in the financial district. I thought of Madison. I thought of her arrogance, her refusal to listen, her belief that she could bend reality to her will. I felt a pang of sorrow for the sister I used to have, the one who built pillow forts with me, but that sister was gone, replaced by a CEO who thought she was a god. I tried. Madison, I whispered to the glass. I really did. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. I needed to sleep. I needed to be rested, because tomorrow, the world was going to change, and for the first time in my life, I wouldn't be the one scrambling for cover. I would be the one watching the rain from a very warm, very dry place. The timeline snapped back to the present, to the heavy scent of roasted turkey and the cloying perfume of success that hung over my parents' dining room. I was back in my body, back in the chair at the end of the table, listening to the same voices that had dominated my life for 3 decades. The memories of my investigation, the late nights at Northline Metrics, and the encrypted emails to Mara were all hidden behind my calm, impassive face. To everyone else at the table, I was just Sage, the sister who didn't quite make it. Madison was standing now, holding her wineglass by the stem, her face flushed with the kind of adrenaline that replaces blood in the veins of corporate conquerors. "I have been saving this for dessert," she announced, her voice ringing off the crystal glassware. "But I cannot wait any longer. Yesterday evening, we finalized the signatures. Helio Core has officially entered into a strategic partnership with Genta Global. It is a 10-year contract worth $300 million. The table erupted. My father slammed his hand on the wood in delight, shaking the silverware. My mother gasped, clasping her hands to her chest as if she had just witnessed a miracle. The guests, Harold the lawyer, Sasha the COO, and the various hangers-on, clapped with the fervor of people who knew their bonuses had just been secured. $300 million, my father roared, beaming at his golden child. My God, Madison, that is historic. You are going to be in the history books. It is the biggest SaaS contract in the state this year, Logan, the CFO, added smoothly. He leaned back in his chair, unbuttoning his suit jacket to accommodate the heavy meal. He looked at me across the table, his eyes glinting with arrogance. And the best part? The margins are pure platinum. We are talking about 80% gross margin on the services side. Of course, you have to understand how to read the complex structure of the deal to see that. It is not something you would find in a basic spreadsheet. Sage, it takes a certain level of sophistication to structure capital efficiency like this. I took a sip of my water to hide the dryness in my throat. I knew exactly how they structured it. They were likely booking the entire 10-year value up front to plug the hole in this quarter's earnings, while pushing the delivery costs into the next decade. It was borrowing from a future that would never arrive. I am just glad we have a team that understands vision, Madison said, sitting back down and basking in the applause. I was on CNBC last week, and Kramer told me that HelioCore is the only stock he is buying for his grandchildren. He called me the Queen of the Cloud. Can you believe that? You deserve it, honey, my mother said, wiping a tear from her eye. You have worked so hard. You have sacrificed so much. It is true, Ethan chimed in. He was peeling a clementine with the aggressive confidence of a man whose wife pays the mortgage. He looked at me, a smirk playing on his lips. He needed a punching bag to elevate the mood even further. And I was the designated target. You know, Sage, with this new deal, the stock is probably going to pop another 15% on Monday. It is a shame you are playing around with your little meme stocks. What did you buy again? Dogecoin? Or are you shorting the American dream? The table laughed. It was a wet, heavy sound. I am diversified, Ethan, I said quietly. I stick to fundamentals. Fundamentals, Ethan crowed, tossing a piece of peel onto his plate. That is code for, I am scared to make money. You see this, folks? This is the difference between a worker bee and a queen bee. Madison creates value. Sage counts pennies. My phone, which was face down on the tablecloth next to my fork, buzzed. It was a long, sustained vibration, then another, then a third. It was not a text message. It was a push notification from the brokerage app I had set to emergency priority only. It meant that a pre-market movement or a breaking news story had triggered a volatility halt. My heart skipped a beat. Then it started to race, thumping against my ribs like a trapped bird. I glanced down. The screen lit up briefly. One new email. Mara S. Subject, it is live. Another buzz. Bloomberg Terminal Alert. HelioCore Systems, HCS. Mentioned in investigative report. Another buzz. CNBC breaking news. Accounting irregularities alleged at major tech firm. The phone was dancing on the tablecloth now, a tiny, vibrating harbinger of doom. Sage, Madison snapped, her voice cut through the laughter. She was frowning at me. annoyance creasing her perfect forehead. Seriously? We are celebrating a $300 million deal, and you cannot get off your phone? It is incredibly rude. Sorry, I murmured, reaching for the device. My hand was shaking, just slightly. It seems urgent. What could possibly be urgent in your life? Madison asked, rolling her eyes. She looked at the guests, seeking validation. She is probably checking to see if her Uber Eats coupon expired. This is what I mean. Mom, serious people. People who manage real wealth. We do not glue ourselves to screens at dinner. We have people to do that for us. It is called having presence. Put it away, Sage, my father commanded, his voice stern. Tonight is about your sister. Show some respect. I held the phone in my hand. The metal was cold. I slid my thumb across the screen to unlock it, keeping it below the edge of the table so only I could see. I opened the financial news app. The banner was red. It took up the top third of the screen. HelioCore's accounting magic. Too good to be real? Exclusive report. Inside the aggressive revenue recognition policies and capitalized costs that have inflated the tech giant's valuation, whistleblowers allege massive divergence between server usage and reported growth. I read the first 3 lines. It was all there. The server logs, the hiring freezes, the management judgment clause. Mara had not held back. She had dropped a nuclear bomb on Madison's castle. My phone buzzed again. Market Watch. HCS. Pre-market trading suspended pending news dissemination. Brokerage alert. Your put option positions have increased in implied volatility by 500%. I looked up. The scene before me was surreal. It was like watching a film on slow motion while the audio played at double speed. Madison was laughing at something Sasha said, her head thrown back, her neck exposed. Logan was pouring more wine, the dark red liquid swirling in the glass. Oblivious to the fact that his career was effectively over, my parents were glowing with pride, completely unaware that the net worth they boasted about, which was 90% tied up in HelioCore stock, was evaporating into the ether at this very second. They were ghosts. They were walking, talking ghosts attending their own funeral, and they didn't even know they were dead yet. Sage? Ethan asked, leaning in. You look pale. Did your crypto crash? Did you lose your lunch money? He laughed at his own joke. The others joined in, a chorus of successful people mocking the failure. I looked at Ethan. I looked at Madison. For a split second, I felt a terrifying urge to scream, to flip the table, to show them the screen and watch their faces melt in horror. I wanted to yell. I told you. I warned you. I tried to stop this. But the urge passed. It was replaced by a cold, heavy resignation. I was not the villain here. I was the messenger who had been shot so many times I had decided to start wearing Kevlar. No, Ethan, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I did not lose money. I think I just realized I am full. Well, try to perk up, Madison said, lifting her glass for another toast. We are going to open the vintage champagne next. Harold, tell them about the acquisition targets we are looking at for Q1. I want Sage to hear what real business strategy sounds like. I looked down at my phone one last time. The article was already trending. The comments section was filling up with terrified investors asking if this was true. The link was being shared thousands of times a minute. The snowball had been pushed. It was rolling down the mountain now, gathering speed, gathering weight. It would crush the trees. It would crush the cabin. It would bury everything in this room in a white, freezing silence. And there was absolutely nothing anyone could do to stop it. I took a deep breath, the air smelling of turkey and hubris. I pressed the side button. The screen went black. I am listening, Madison, I said softly. I am listening to every word. I locked my hands in my lap and waited for the avalanche to hit the front door. The silence that followed my internal prediction was shattered not by a scream, but by the doorbell. It rang once, a polite chime that echoed through the foyer. Then it rang again, longer this time, then a third time, insistent and frantic, followed by the heavy thud of a fist pounding against the solid oak wood. Everyone at the table froze. Forks hovered halfway to mouths. Madison lowered her wineglass. Her brow furrowed in irritation. "Rosa," Madison called out to the housekeeper, her voice sharp. "Who on earth is making that racket? Tell them we are in the middle of a private dinner." Rosa appeared in the doorway of the dining room a moment later. She was a woman who had worked for my parents for 15 years and had seen everything from drunken tantrums to secret affairs, but I had never seen her look like this. Her face was gray. Her hands were wringing the front of her apron. "Miss Madison," Rosa stammered, "I cannot. There are people at the gate. There are vans with satellite dishes on the roof, and there is a young woman. She says she works for you. She jumped the fence when the security guard refused to open it. She is running up the driveway." Before Madison could process this, the dining room doors burst open. It was Jenna, Madison's 24-year-old executive assistant. Jenna was usually a picture of corporate perfection. Hair sleek, clothes pressed, phone in hand. Tonight, she looked like a refugee from a disaster zone. Her blazer was unbuttoned, her hair was windblown, and she was gasping for air, her chest heaving. She held an iPad in one hand and 2 phones in the other. "Madison," Jenna wheezed, stumbling toward the table. You have to look, right now." "Jenna?" Madison stood up, her napkin falling to the floor. "What are you doing here? You are supposed to be coordinating the press release for Monday." "There is no Monday," Jenna choked out. "It broke. The story broke. 10 minutes ago. The automated trading algorithms picked it up before the embargo lifted. The after-hours market is a bloodbath." Madison stared at her. "What story?" "The accounting story," Jenna cried, shoving the iPad into Madison's hands. "The investigation. It is everywhere. Twitter, Bloomberg, CNBC. They are calling it the HelioCore fraud." Logan, the CFO, moved faster than I had ever seen a man of his size move. He snatched his smartphone from his pocket. The arrogant smirk that had been plastered on his face all evening vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. "Turn on the TV," Logan commanded, his voice cracking. "Someone turn on the damn TV?" Ethan, confused and holding a half-peeled clementine, grabbed the remote for the 60-inch screen mounted above the fireplace. He fumbled with the buttons, hitting the power. The screen flickered to life. It was tuned to a financial news network. The normal ticker at the bottom of the screen was gone, replaced by a scrolling banner in urgent, bright crimson. "Breaking news. HelioCore systems under fire for aggressive accounting practices." Above the banner was a split screen. On the left was a flattering stock photo of Madison from her last Forbes shoot. On the right was the HelioCore logo, superimposed over a stock chart that looked like a cliff face. The anchor, a man with silver hair and a grim expression, was speaking rapidly. "We are receiving reports of a massive whistleblower complaint filed with the SEC regarding HelioCore systems," the anchor said. "The report alleges that the tech darling has been systematically inflating revenue figures through premature recognition of long-term contracts and capitalizing operating expenses to hide losses. The stock, which was trading at $240 a share at market close, has plummeted in after-hours trading. It is currently halted, but the last printed price was $110. $110? My father whispered. The color drained from his face so fast, it looked like a physical fluid leaving his body. That is less than half." "It is a mistake," Madison shrieked. She threw the iPad onto the table, shattering a crystal water glass. Water soaked into the tablecloth, spreading like a dark stain. "It is a hit piece. It is a lie. Logan, tell them it is a lie. Get on the phone with the exchange." Logan was already on the phone, his Bluetooth earpiece blinking rapidly. He was pacing back and forth on the expensive rug, sweating profusely. "I cannot get through to the listing agent," Logan shouted, his voice rising an octave. "The lines are jammed. I am looking at the order book. There are no buyers. Madison, there are 0 bids. It is all sell orders, millions of shares. The algorithm is dumping everything." "Who is selling?" Madison demanded, grabbing Logan's arm. "Is it retail? Is it the little people?" "It is everyone," Logan yelled back, shaking her off. "It is Vanguard. It is BlackRock. It is the pension funds. They are liquidating the entire sector just to get away from us." My father stood up, his legs shaking. "Madison," he said, his voice trembling with a vulnerability I had never heard before. "We have 80% of our liquidity in those shares. You told me it was safe. You told me to leverage the house to buy more last month. Is this temporary? Tell me it is temporary." Madison looked at him, her eyes wide and wild. She opened her mouth to speak, to spin the narrative, to tell the story she was so good at telling, but no words came out, because for the first time in her life, the story didn't matter. The math had arrived. In the chaos, nobody was looking at me. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap. I slowly turned my phone over and tapped the screen. The brokerage app was glowing with a neon green that hurt my eyes. My put options, the insurance I had bought against my sister's hubris, were reacting to the crash exactly as the mathematical models predicted. As the stock price collapsed, the value of my options skyrocketed. Heliocore, put option $180. Strike, up 850%. Heliocore, put option $150. Strike, up 1,200%. The numbers were ticking up in real time. Every time Logan shouted about the price dropping another $10, my net worth jumped by an amount equal to my annual salary. And then, I saw something else on the screen. A related ticker was moving. LumaGrid Analytics, LGA, up 12% in after-hours trading. I tapped the news feed for LumaGrid. A commentator on the TV was speaking about it at that exact moment. "With Heliocore imploding," the TV analyst said, "investors are scrambling for safety. Capital is fleeing into competitors with transparent balance sheets. LumaGrid Analytics is seeing a massive inflow of volume as the market looks for a clean alternative." I had bet on the crash, and I had bet on the lifeboat. I was winning on both sides. "This cannot be happening," my mother wailed. She was clutching her pearls, a cliché brought to terrifying life. "We have the gala next week. We are the sponsors. What will people say?" "Forget the damn gala. Elaine," my father snapped at her, snapping the facade of the happy marriage. "We might lose the house. Logan, do something. Fix it." "I cannot fix a fraud investigation." "Gregory," Logan snapped back, losing all deference. "They are quoting internal emails. They have the server data. They know about the capitalization scheme. Who leaked this? Who the hell leaked this?" He looked around the room, his eyes wild. His gaze passed over me without stopping. To him, I was just the furniture. I was too stupid to understand what was happening, let alone orchestrate it. Madison was now on her own phone, frantically dialing. "Harold," she screamed at the company lawyer, who was currently trying to sneak out the side door of the dining room. "Where are you going? You need to draft a cease and desist to the network. You need to sue the whistleblower." Harold froze, his hand on the doorknob. He turned back, his face pale. "I cannot represent you, Madison," Harold said quietly. "If these allegations are true, if you signed those Sarbanes-Oxley certifications knowing the numbers were false, that is a criminal matter. I am a corporate lawyer. You need a defense attorney, a very expensive one." He opened the door and walked out. The heavy thud of the door closing felt like a gavel coming down. The other guests were reacting in ways that were both horrifying and predictable. Sasha, the COO, was hiding in the corner, furiously deleting posts from her Instagram account. I saw her thumb hitting delete on photos of the company jet, the parties, the champagne toasts. She was scrubbing the evidence of the lifestyle that was financed by the lie. Ethan, the husband who had mocked my small investment 5 minutes ago, was sitting in his chair, staring blankly at the wall. He looked like a child whose balloon had popped. "My options," Ethan whispered. "I had employee stock options vesting next month. They were worth $4 million yesterday." He looked at me, His eyes were wet. Sage, they are worthless. The strike price is $180. If the stock is at 100, they are worth 0. I looked back at him. I took a sip of my water. That is the risk of a concentrated portfolio. Ethan, I said calmly, diversification is important. He flinched as if I had slapped him. Suddenly, a flash went off. I turned my head. One of the B-list guests, a socialite friend of Madison's named Chloe, was holding her phone up. She wasn't calling for help. She was live streaming. Guys, I am literally at the Paul residence right now, Chloe whispered into her phone, panning the camera across the chaotic room, capturing my father's red face, my mother's tears, and Madison's frantic screaming. It is insane. The CEO is losing it. Heliocore crash drama. Get out! Madison shrieked, spotting the phone. She lunged at Chloe. Get out of my house! All of you! Get out! The dinner party disintegrated. Guests grabbed their coats and fled, eager to distance themselves from the radioactive fallout. The sound of expensive cars peeling out of the driveway mixed with the shouting of the reporters at the gate. The room was left with just the family, the core wreckage. Madison stood at the head of the table, her hands gripping the wood so hard her knuckles were white. She looked at the TV screen. The silver-haired anchor was wrapping up the segment. The graphic behind him showed a burning building with the Heliocore logo on it. The question now, the anchor said, his voice grave, is not if the stock will recover, but if the company can survive the week. The SEC has announced a formal probe. The Department of Justice is reportedly reviewing the file. If these numbers are indeed fabricated, we are looking at the largest corporate collapse since the dot-com bubble. One analyst I spoke to called it Heliocore-mageddon. Back to you. Susan. The screen cut to a commercial for luxury life insurance. Silence descended on the room. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket. My father sank into his chair, putting his head in his hands. My mother was sobbing softly into her napkin. Logan was slumped against the wall, sliding down until he hit the floor, his phone dangling from his hand. And Madison just stared at the empty space where her future used to be. I watched them all. I felt a strange detachment, a cool clarity. I looked at my phone one last time. The notification light blinked green. Order update. Lumagrid Analytics position up 15%. Order update. Put options, valuation update. Profit target exceeded. I locked the screen. I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles in my dress. I think I will head home now, I said. My voice was the only steady thing in the room. Nobody answered. They didn't even hear me. They were trapped in the nightmare. I was the only one who had woken up. I picked up my purse, checked to make sure my keys were there, and walked out of the dining room. Stepping over the shattered glass on the floor, I had my hand on the brass handle of the dining room door, ready to step out into the cool night air and leave the wreckage of the Paul family dynasty behind me. I was done. The play was over. The curtain had fallen, and I had exited the stage. But then, Logan's voice cut through the sobbing and the silence like a jagged piece of glass. "Wait," he said. It wasn't a shout. It was a strangled gasp, the sound of a man who had just seen a ghost. "Hold on. I just got a priority flag from the transfer agent." I paused. I didn't turn around. Not yet. I just stood there, listening to the heavy breathing of the people who had spent my entire life telling me I was small. "What is it now?" my father asked, his voice thick with misery. He was slumped in his chair, staring at the blank TV screen. "More bad news? Did the stock drop another $10? "No," Logan said, typing furiously on his phone, his thumbs blurring against the screen. "It is a liquidation report. The system flags any sale over 1% of the total outstanding float that occurred within 48 hours of a major volatility event. Someone got out. Gregory. Someone dumped a massive block of shares 3 days ago, right at the top, right before the article hit." My father's head snapped up. The misery in his eyes was instantly replaced by a paranoid fury. He looked like a cornered animal searching for something to bite. "I knew it," he hissed, slamming his fist onto the table, making the silverware jump. I knew this was a setup. It was a hedge fund, wasn't it? One of those vulture funds in New York? They shorted us. Then they planted that story with the reporter to crash the price. It is market manipulation. Who was it? Logan? Was it Citadel? Was it Bridgewater? It wasn't a fund, Jenna whispered. She was looking at her own phone now, reading the email that had been CC'd to the executive team. Her face was pale, illuminated by the harsh blue light of the screen. It is a private holding company, an LLC. What is the name? Madison demanded. She wiped her eyes, her makeup smeared, trying to regain some semblance of command. If we know who they are, we can sue them. We can claim they had illicit knowledge. Give me the name. Jenna. Harbor Light Holdings, LLC, Jenna read aloud. Incorporated in Delaware 4 years ago. The room went quiet. The name meant nothing to them. It was just a generic shell company, one of millions used by the wealthy to mask their assets. Harbor Light, my father spat. Cowards, hiding behind a shell. Logan, drill down. Find the beneficial owner. I want to know who stabbed us in the back. I want a name. Logan was already doing it. He was accessing the secure shareholder register, bypassing the privacy filters with his administrator override. I could hear his breath hitching in his chest. I slowly turned around. I leaned my back against the doorframe, crossing my arms over my chest. I watched them scramble. It was fascinating to see how desperate they were to find an external enemy, someone to blame for the disaster they had created themselves. I have the tax filing associated with the entity, Logan said. His voice had dropped to a whisper. He stopped typing. He stared at the phone. Then he looked up. He didn't look at my father. He didn't look at Madison. He looked straight at me. His eyes were wide, round with a shock so profound it looked like physical pain. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Logan? Madison snapped. Who is it? Stop staring at Sage and answer me. Logan swallowed hard. I could see his Adam's apple bob. The beneficial owner of Harbor Light Holdings, Logan said, his voice trembling, is Sage Paul. The silence that followed was not like the silence before. It was heavier. It was absolute. It sucked the air out of the room. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, marking the seconds of their comprehension. My father slowly turned his head. My mother lowered her hands from her mouth. Jenna gasped. And Madison looked at me as if I had just taken off a mask to reveal I was an alien species. What? Madison whispered. That is impossible. Sage doesn't have money. Sage has a hobby account. She buys index funds. It is 4%, Logan continued, reading the data as if he were reading an autopsy report. Harbor Light Holdings held just under 4% of the total outstanding equity of HelioCore Systems. They began accumulating shares during the Series B private round, 5 years ago. They participated in the Series C. They bought more at the IPO, and they liquidated the entire position starting 14 days ago, concluding the final sale this past Tuesday. 4%? My father repeated. The number hung in the air. He did the mental math. I saw the numbers scroll behind his eyes. Even at the pre-crash valuation, 4% of HelioCore was a fortune. It was generational wealth. It was more liquid cash than my father had ever held in his hands at one time. You? Madison stood up. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. You? Me, I said. My voice was calm, steady, and cool. You owned 4% of my company? Madison screamed. Her voice cracked, hysterical and shrill. And you never said a word? We sat at this table every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, and I talked about my shareholders, and you sat there playing with your peas. You let me treat you like you were nothing. I didn't let you do anything, Madison, I said, stepping away from the door and walking back toward the table. You treated me like nothing because that is what you needed to see. You needed a foil. You needed a loser to make yourself feel like a winner. I just didn't feel the need to correct you." "Where did you get the capital?" my father asked, his voice stunned. "The inheritance. It was $50,000. That is not enough to buy into a Series B round." "Leverage," I said simply, "and compounding. I turned that $50,000 into $200,000 in the first 3 years trading commodities. Then I used that to buy into the private round when HelioCore was just a slide deck and a promise. I believed in the product then. Madison, before you started cooking the books, I kept reinvesting. I lived in a studio apartment and ate ramen while I bought more of your company because I saw the potential. I was your biggest believer." "You sold," Logan accused, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You sold right before the crash. You knew." "Of course I knew," I said. "Fraud," Madison shrieked. She pointed at me, her face twisted into an ugly mask of rage. "That is insider trading. You used family information. You stole from us. I am going to call the SEC myself. You are going to jail. Sage, you are going to rot in a cell." I laughed. It was a dry, short sound. "Insider trading?" I asked. "Madison, think about what you are saying. Insider trading requires being an insider. When was the last time you invited me to a board meeting? When was the last time you showed me a draft of an earnings report? You and Dad made it very clear that I was too emotional and too simple for the big table. You locked me out. You insulated me perfectly." I walked over to the table and picked up the pitcher of water. I poured myself a glass, taking my time. "I analyzed your public filings," I continued, looking at Logan. "I tracked your server traffic using open-source data. I read the reviews your employees posted on Glassdoor. I noticed that your capitalization of software costs was 3 standard deviations above the industry average. I didn't use a single piece of secret information. I just read the story you were publishing, and I realized the plot didn't make sense." You bet against your own sister," my mother whispered. She looked at me with horror, as if I had committed a murder. "Sage, how could you? We are family." "I didn't bet against family, Mom," I said gently. "I protected my capital. That is what Dad always told me to do, isn't it? Be practical. Be safe." I looked at my father. He was staring at me, but the anger was fading from his eyes, replaced by a strange, dawning realization. He looked at Madison, who was hyperventilating, her empire crumbling around her. Then he looked at me, the daughter in the cheap dress who had just walked away with a fortune while the rest of them burned. He realized the irony, the failure, was the only one who had actually succeeded at the game he worshipped. I had played capitalism better than any of them, and I had done it in total silence. "You knew it was going to zero," my father said hoarsely, "and you didn't tell us to sell. You let us hold the bag." "I tried to tell you," I said. "I sat right here, in this chair, an hour ago. I tried to talk about the data. Madison told me to shut up. You told me to show respect. I sent Madison an email 3 weeks ago outlining the risks. She told me to stay in my lane." I looked at Madison. She had stopped screaming. She was slumped in her chair, shaking her head, tears streaming down her face. She looked small. "I stayed in my lane, Madison," I said softly. "My lane was the exit ramp. Yours was the cliff." "You are a monster," Ethan spat. He was looking at me with pure hatred, the hatred of a man who knows he is broke. "You are sitting on millions of dollars while we lose everything." "I am sitting on the results of my research," I corrected him. "And Ethan, it is not just the stock sale. I also bought put options, a lot of them." Ethan's jaw dropped. Logan closed his eyes as if in physical pain. "You shorted us," Logan whispered. "My God, you are the whale in the options market too." "I hedged my risk," I said. "That is what a real portfolio manager does." I picked up my purse again. The room felt different now. The air of superiority that had suffocated me for 30 years was gone. It had been sucked out the window, leaving behind the stale smell of fear and the sharp, metallic scent of truth. They were ruined. The investigations, the lawsuits, the clawbacks. It would take years to resolve. Madison would likely face criminal charges. My parents' assets would be tied up in litigation. But I was free. Harborlight Holdings LLC was liquid, solvent, and untouchable. I walked to the door again. This time, no one tried to stop me. No one yelled. They just watched me, the quiet little sister who had turned out to be the executioner. I stopped and looked back one last time. "For years," I said, my voice ringing in the silent room. "You all told me I didn't understand real investing. You told me I was playing a game." I looked at Madison, meeting her tear-filled eyes. "Maybe you were right," I said. "But tonight, the market just graded my homework, and it looks like I got an A." I turned and walked out the door, leaving them alone with their turkey, their crystal glasses, and their worthless paper. The formal notification from the Securities and Exchange Commission did not arrive with a siren or a bang. It arrived as a dry, bureaucratic press release posted to their website at 8 in the morning on a Monday. The Division of Enforcement announced it had opened a formal investigation into HelioCore Systems regarding irregularities in revenue recognition practices and the improper capitalization of operating expenses. In the world of finance, those dry words are the equivalent of a coroner pronouncing a time of death. The market reaction was instantaneous and violent. If the initial crash on Thanksgiving night had been a stumble, this was the fall off the cliff. The stock, which had already lost half its value, shed another 40% in the first hour of trading. The ticker symbol HCS became a toxic asset, something no fund manager wanted to touch for fear of contamination. I watched it happen from my apartment, drinking tea. The news channels were running a continuous loop of the disaster, but the real damage wasn't just in the stock price, it was in the inbox. By Wednesday, the investigative reporters, led by Mara, who was now being hailed as the journalist of the year, had obtained internal emails. They were splashed across the front pages of the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. One email chain in particular was damning. It was dated 6 months prior, between Logan and Madison. Subject: Q2. Capitalization limits. From Logan, CFO, to Madison, CEO. Madison: We cannot justify capitalizing 70% of the engineering payroll this quarter. The projects do not meet the criteria for future asset creation. If we move this cost to the balance sheet, we are essentially manufacturing profit out of thin air. The auditors are going to ask questions. From Madison, CEO, to Logan, CFO. The auditors work for us. Logan: Make them understand the vision. We cannot miss the earnings target. If we show a loss now, the merger deal dies. Fix the optics. I do not care how you do it. Just make the numbers work. Fix the optics. That 3-word phrase was the nail in the coffin. It stripped away any defense of ignorance. It proved that the accounting fraud wasn't an accident or a mistake. It was a directive from the top. The fallout was swift. On Thursday evening, the board of directors of HelioCore Systems held an emergency meeting. They didn't even allow Madison to attend in person. She had to dial in via video conference. I heard the details later from a contact at the company. The meeting lasted less than 20 minutes. The chairman, a man who had toasted Madison as a visionary just 2 months ago, read a prepared statement. Madison was to step down as CEO, effective immediately, pending the outcome of the investigation. Her access to company servers was revoked. Her keycard was deactivated. The perfect CEO, the darling of Silicon Valley, had been fired from the company she built. The media frenzy shifted gears. It was no longer just a financial story. It was a Shakespearean tragedy. Reporters camped out on the lawn of my parents' estate. They flew drones over the backyard. They dug into our history. The narrative of the 2 sisters became the flavor of the month. The Builder and the Watcher. One headline read, "One sister built a castle of glass. The other threw the first stone." My parents were trapped inside their mansion, the curtains drawn. I went to visit them on Friday, driving my nondescript sedan through the throng of photographers who barely glanced at me, not recognizing the boring sister. Inside, the house felt like a mausoleum. The air was stale. My mother was sitting in the kitchen, staring at a cup of cold coffee. My father was in the library, surrounded by stacks of paper, legal notices, margin calls from his broker, and threats of lawsuits. When he saw me, he didn't yell, he didn't lecture, he looked smaller, as if the air had been let out of him. "We lost the beach house," he said quietly. "The margin call on the Heliocore shares. They liquidated everything to cover the debt. The beach house, the boat, the portfolio. It is all gone. Sage." I sat down opposite him. "I am sorry, Dad." "You told me," he murmured, looking at a piece of paper in his hand. "Last January, you told me to move 20% of the trust into treasury bonds. You said, just in case the tech sector cools off." I nodded. "I remember." "I did it," he said, looking up at me with watery eyes. "I did not tell Madison because she would have been offended, but I moved that 20%. It is the only money we have left. If I hadn't listened to that one piece of advice, we would be on the street." It was a bitter victory. My father was finally acknowledging my financial acumen, but only because the alternative was total ruin. He realized that the daughter he called fearful was actually the only one who had understood the concept of survival. But the legal machinery was just getting started. Madison received her first subpoena on Saturday. It wasn't just a request for documents. It was a summons to appear before a grand jury. The Department of Justice was looking at criminal charges, securities fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. I was summoned too, but in a different capacity. I was a witness. I met with my lawyer, Robert, before responding. He sat in his cluttered office, reviewing the subpoena. "You are in a unique position, Sage," Robert said, tapping the paper. "You are the whistleblower, but you are also a beneficiary of the crash thanks to your put options. The defense is going to try to paint you as a saboteur. They will say you leaked the data to profit from the decline." "I used public data," I insisted. "I can prove every calculation came from the 10K filings." "We know that," Robert said. "And the SEC knows that. That is why you are a witness for the prosecution, not a target. As long as you stick to the truth, that you acted on public information, you are untouchable. You are the smartest person in this entire mess." The hardest part wasn't the legal preparation. It was the request that came Sunday night. Madison asked to see me. She was staying at a hotel downtown, having fled the reporters at her own house. I met her in her suite. It was a luxury room, but it looked like a prison cell. Room service trays were piled up by the door, uneaten. The curtains were pulled tight. Madison looked terrible. Her hair was unwashed, pulled back in a messy knot. She was wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt, stripped of her designer armor. Her eyes were red and swollen. When I walked in, she didn't scream. She didn't accuse me of insider trading anymore. She just looked terrified. "They are talking about prison. Sage," she whispered, her voice shaking. "My lawyer said, he said 5 to 10 years. Federal prison. I cannot go to prison. I will die in there." I stood by the window, looking at the sliver of light coming through the curtains. "You signed the certifications. Madison, you knew the numbers were wrong." "I did it for the company," she pleaded, standing up and walking toward me. "I did it to save the jobs. We just needed a little more time. If the merger had gone through, we could have fixed the accounting later. It was a bridge loan. Sage, that is all it was." "It was fraud," I said softly. She grabbed my hand. Her grip was desperate, clammy. "Sage, you are the witness. You are the one who explained the math to the SEC. If you just told them that maybe your analysis was ambiguous, if you said that the accounting rules are open to interpretation, they might drop the criminal charges. They might just make it a civil fine." I looked at her. I looked at the sister who had mocked me at Thanksgiving, who had told me I was small, who had dismissed my warnings, but I also saw the little girl I used to play with. "You want me to lie?" I asked. "You want me to commit perjury?" "I am your sister," she sobbed, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Doesn't that mean anything? Mom and Dad are devastated. If I go to jail, It will kill them. Please, Sage, just soften the blow. Say you were not sure. Say it was a gray area. My heart ached. It physically hurt to see her this broken. Part of me wanted to say yes. Part of me wanted to fix it, just like I used to fix her homework when we were kids. But then, I thought about the thousands of retail investors who had lost their savings. I thought about the teachers and firefighters whose pension funds held HelioCore stock. They didn't have a sister to lie for them. They were the ones paying for Madison's bridge loan. I pulled my hand away. I cannot do that, Madison, I said, my voice steady but full of sorrow. I cannot lie for you. The math is the math. You chose to ignore it. Now you have to live with the result. You are destroying me, she screamed, the sadness turning back into rage. You are selfish. You always were. No, I said, walking to the door. I am just the only one who is telling you the truth. I left the hotel room. I heard her sobbing behind the door, a sound of pure, unadulterated despair. The next day, Madison went to the HelioCore headquarters one last time to collect her personal effects, escorted by a security guard who used to open the door for her. I wasn't there, but Jenna told me about it later. Madison walked into the corner office, the one with the panoramic view of Silicon Valley. The shelves were lined with awards: CEO of the Year, Innovator Under 40, Tech Titan. There were magazine covers framed in glass, showing her confident, smiling face. She stood there for a long time, looking at the accolades. Then she looked at her desk. It was empty, wiped clean by the IT department. No laptop, no files, no phone. She picked up a single framed photo of our family, taken 5 years ago, before the IPO, before the lies, before the money became the only thing that mattered. Jenna said Madison sat down in her ergonomic chair, the leather squeaking in the silence. She looked at the awards, then at the empty desk. It doesn't add up, Madison whispered to the empty room. She wasn't talking about the accounting anymore. She was talking about the life she had built. She had all the trophies, all the applause, all the validation. But when the audit came, the balance sheet of her character was empty. She put the photo in a cardboard box, stood up, and walked out of the office, leaving the magazine covers behind. They were just paper, after all, and paper burns very easily when you light a match to the truth. The dust did not settle all at once. It settled layer by layer, like ash after a volcanic eruption, coating the city of Denver in a gray film of reality. 3 weeks had passed since the night of the Thanksgiving dinner. In that short time, the stock price of HelioCore Systems had stopped plummeting only because it had hit the floor. It was trading now at $4.50 a share, down from a high of nearly $300. The New York Stock Exchange had issued a delisting warning. The company that was once the crown jewel of the Silicon Prairie was now a penny stock, a cautionary tale taught in business schools as a case study in hubris. The class action lawsuits arrived in waves. First came the pension funds, suing for hundreds of millions of dollars. Then came the employee groups, the engineers and salespeople who had been compensated in stock options that were now worth less than the paper they were printed on. Then came the vendors, the landlords, and the banks. It was a feeding frenzy, and there was very little meat left on the bone. I watched it all from a distance. I had returned to my apartment in the city. It was the same apartment I had lived in before I became wealthy, and I saw no reason to leave it. It was a one-bedroom unit on the 4th floor with a view of a brick wall and a slice of the sky. My furniture was simple: a gray sofa, a standing desk, and a bookshelf overflowing with biographies of economists. My desk was dominated by my 2 monitors. For years, these screens had been my window into the market. Now, they were my shield against the world. I sat there on a Tuesday morning, sipping black coffee, scrolling through my inbox. It was overflowing, but it was not spam anymore. Subject: Managing Director role, Sovereign Wealth Fund. Subject: Senior Analyst position, Goldman Sachs. Subject: Consulting opportunity, Forensic Accounting Division. The world had suddenly discovered Sage Paul, the same industry that had ignored me for a decade. dismissing me as a retail amateur, was now desperate to hire the woman who had predicted the biggest crash of the year. They offered me packages with base salaries of $400,000. They offered me signing bonuses. They offered me prestige. I deleted them all. I did not want to be a managing director. I did not want to wear a suit and sit in a glass office and help billionaires become trillionaires. I had seen what that world did to people. I had seen what it did to my sister. Instead, I opened a different email. It was from the dean of the business school at the local state university. Dear Ms. Paul, we would be honored if you would consider teaching the advanced seminar on financial statement analysis and fraud detection next semester. The students need to hear from someone who actually does the work. I hit reply. I accept, but I want to teach it my way. I was also building something of my own. I had taken a portion of the profits from my put options, money that felt heavy with the weight of my family's collapse, and hired a small team of developers. We were building a platform called The Fine Print. It was an educational site for retail investors, designed to teach them how to read footnotes, how to spot red flags, and how to ignore the flashy narratives of charismatic CEOs. I wanted to create an army of people like me, people who could not be fooled. That afternoon, my buzzer rang. I checked the camera. It was my parents. They stood in the hallway, looking out of place in my modest building. My father was wearing a coat that looked too big for him. He had lost weight. My mother was not wearing her usual jewelry. She looked stripped down, raw. I buzzed them in. We sat in my small living room. I made tea. It was Earl Grey, the cheap kind from the grocery store, not the imported blend they were used to. They drank it without complaint. Madison is not coming, my mother said softly. Her voice trembled. She is not ready to see you. I know, I said. I did not expect her to. She is meeting with the public defenders today, my father said. He stared into his teacup as if reading the leaves. The assets are frozen. We cannot afford the white shoe firms anymore. She has to use court-appointed counsel. The silence stretched between us. It was heavy with the things we had never said. Sage, my mother started, and then her voice broke. She put her cup down and covered her face with her hands. I am so sorry. I watched her shoulders shake. I had waited 32 years to hear those words. I had imagined this moment 1,000 times. In my imagination, I felt triumphant. I felt vindicated. But in reality, I just felt tired. We were so blinded, my mother sobbed. We were so proud of her. She was everything we thought we wanted to be. And we looked at you, and we thought you were just drifting. We did not see that you were the one building the foundation while she was building the clouds. I tried to tell you, I said gently. It was never about being rich. It was about being real. We know, my father said. He looked up, and his eyes were red. You saved us. Sage, that money you made me move to bonds. It is the only reason we still have a roof over our heads. We treated you like the disappointment, and you turned out to be the savior. He reached across the table, his hands shaking. Can you forgive us? Can we start over? I looked at his hand. It was the hand of a man who had lost his identity, which had been wrapped up in his eldest daughter's success. I reached out and took his hand. It felt dry and frail. I forgive you, I said. But we are not going back to how it was. My father nodded eagerly. Of course, things will be different. We will listen to you now. You can manage the rest of the accounts. You can take charge. No, I said firmly. I pulled my hand back. They looked confused. I am not doing this to replace Madison, I said. I am not going to be the new golden child. I am not going to manage your money. And I am not going to be the person you brag about at dinner parties to make yourselves feel important. I am your daughter. That is it. If you want to have dinner with me, we talk about books, or art, or the weather. We do not talk about money, and you do not compare me to anyone. My mother wiped her eyes. She looked at me, really looked at me. For the first time in years, she saw the strength in my jaw, the calm in my eyes. Okay, she whispered. Okay, Sage, we can do that. They left an hour later. It was a fragile peace, but it was honest. After they left, I sat back down at my desk. I opened a folder on my computer labeled Madison. Inside were the emails she had sent me over the last 3 weeks. I had read every single one, but I had not replied to a single one. The first ones were angry. From Madison. Subject: You owe me. You planned this. You waited until I was vulnerable and you struck. You are jealous. Sage: You have always been jealous. You think this money makes you better than me? It makes you a vulture. Then, as the reality of the indictment set in, the tone shifted to bargaining. From Madison. Subject: Please help. The lawyers are saying I need to pay a retainer of $50,000 just to get the plea deal conversation started. I do not have access to my accounts. Sage: Please, you made millions off my back. Just loan me the retainer. I will pay you back when this blows over. And finally, the despair. The email had come in late last night, time-stamped at 3 a.m. From Madison. Subject: No subject. I am sitting in a hotel room that I cannot pay for. Everyone has stopped answering my calls. Logan blocked me. Mom and Dad are crying every time I talk to them. I look in the mirror, and I do not know who is looking back. I am sorry. Sage, I am so sorry. I stared at the screen. The cursor blinked. I wanted to write back. I wanted to tell her that I loved her, that I hated what she had done, but I didn't hate her. I wanted to wire her the money for the lawyer. But I didn't. I knew that if I engaged, I would be pulled back into her vortex. Madison was a black hole of drama and need, and she had to learn to navigate the darkness on her own. She had to learn that actions have consequences that cannot be fixed by a big sister writing a check. I closed the folder. I did not delete the emails, but I did not reply. Sometimes, silence is the only language that tells the truth. 2 days later, I walked into a lecture hall at the university. It was an amphitheater-style room with tiered seating. 60 students sat there, their laptops open, their faces young and eager. They were looking at me. Not the sage Paul, sister of the fraudster, but Professor Paul. I placed my notes on the podium. I adjusted the microphone. "Good morning," I said. My voice echoed slightly, strong and clear. "Welcome to Financial Statement Analysis." I clicked a remote. The screen behind me lit up. It showed a graph of a company's stock price rocketing upward, a perfect, beautiful curve. "I want to tell you a story," I began. "It is a story about a technology company. Let us call them Company X. Company X had a charismatic CEO. They had a product that everyone said was the future. They had revenue growth that beat every projection." I clicked the remote again. The screen changed to show a dense, boring block of text, a screenshot of a footnote from a 10K filing. "And this," I said, pointing to the screen, "is the truth. This is a footnote about revenue recognition policies. It is boring. It is tiny. Most people skipped it. But one investor read it, and because she read it, she knew that Company X was not a rocket ship. It was a Titanic." The students leaned forward. They were listening. "In this class," I continued, making eye contact with a young woman in the front row who reminded me of myself 7 years ago, "we do not care about the story. We do not care about the magazine covers. We care about the math, because stories can be made up, but the numbers never lie. They just wait for someone to pay attention." I taught for 90 minutes. I felt alive. I felt useful. I was not destroying value. I was creating it. I was arming these students with the tools they would need to protect themselves, to protect their families, to ensure that they never ended up at a Thanksgiving dinner being mocked for being prudent. When the class ended, the students filed out, chatting excitedly. I packed up my bag. I walked over to the large window on the far side of the classroom. It looked out over the campus and, beyond that, the skyline of the city. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the buildings. Somewhere out there, in one of those glass towers, lawyers were arguing over the remnants of heliocore. Somewhere out there, my sister was sitting in a room facing the wreckage of her life. But in here, it was quiet. I touched the glass. I thought about the small investment my family had laughed at. They thought I was investing in stocks. They thought I was investing in money. They were wrong. I had been investing in this moment. I had been investing in the ability to stand here, debt-free, guilt-free, and beholden to no one. I had been investing in my own freedom. "Class dismissed," I whispered to the empty room. I turned around, walked out of the hall, and stepped into the rest of my life. The Capitol building was not designed for family reunions. It was designed for accountability. The hearing was titled, "Smoke and Mirrors: Investigating Accounting Malpractice in the Technology Sector," but the press had already dubbed it the Heliocore Trial. I sat in the front row of the witness section, my hands folded tightly in my lap. To my left sat a row of men and women in expensive suits, looking terrified. To my right sat Madison. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her. The shoulder pads of her blazer seemed to hover above her shrinking frame. Her hair was pulled back, but strands were loose, framing a face that had not slept in weeks. Behind her, the gallery was packed. It was not filled with admirers or venture capitalists this time. It was filled with former employees who had lost their health care. It was filled with retirees who had lost their savings. They held binders of evidence and stared at the back of her head with a collective, silent fury. The night before, I had stared at the ceiling of my hotel room until 4 a.m. I felt a crushing weight in my chest. I asked myself if I was a traitor. I asked myself if I should feign ignorance. But then I remembered the emails from the teachers and the firefighters who had written to me after the story broke, thanking me for exposing the lie before they lost everything. My loyalty to my sister ended where her victims began. The committee chairman, a stern senator with glasses perched on the end of his nose, banged his gavel. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the wood-paneled room. "Ms. Paul," the senator said, looking down at Madison, "we have reviewing the internal documents provided by the Department of Justice. We see a pattern of revenue recognition that defies standard accounting principles. We see expenses moved to capital accounts to inflate net income. How do you explain this?" Madison leaned into the microphone. Her voice was thin. It lacked the resonant, commanding timbre she used to have at dinner parties. "Senator," Madison said, her voice trembling, "the technology sector moves fast. The accounting rules are archaic. We were building the future. I was under immense pressure from the market to show growth. Everyone does this. It is the culture of the valley. If I didn't push the boundaries, the investors would have pulled the funding. I was trying to save the company." "You were trying to save the stock price," the senator corrected her sharply. "There is a difference." Madison flinched. She looked around the room, her eyes darting, looking for an ally. She found none. "I call the next witness," the senator announced. "Ms. Sage Paul." I stood up. I could feel Madison's eyes burning into the side of my face. I walked to the witness table and took my seat. I adjusted the microphone. I did not look at my sister. I looked at the committee. "Ms. Paul," the senator said, his tone softening slightly. "You provided the initial analysis that triggered the SEC investigation. Can you walk us through your findings?" "Yes, Senator," I said. My voice was steady. I pressed a button, and a slide appeared on the large monitors in the room. It was a simple chart. It showed 2 lines. One went up at a 45-degree angle, the other was flat. "The blue line is the revenue Heliocore reported to the public," I explained. "The red line is the actual data consumption on their servers, in a software-as-a-service business. These 2 lines must move together. If revenue goes up, usage must go up. As you can see, the usage was flat for 18 months while revenue tripled. This mathematical impossibility suggests that the revenue was being pulled from future contracts or fabricated entirely." I clicked to the next slide. It showed the footnote about capitalization. "Here," I continued, pointing to the screen. "The company began classifying software engineer salaries as capital assets rather than operating expenses. This artificially boosted profit margins by 40%. It was not an innovation in technology. It was an innovation in hiding losses." The room was silent. I was not screaming. I was not accusing. I was just reading the numbers, and the numbers were damning. A congresswoman leaned forward. She looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and pity. "Ms. Paul," she asked, "you are the CEO's sister. You had this information months ago. Why didn't you stop her? Why didn't you tell her clearly what was happening?" I paused. I looked at Madison. She was looking down at her hands, tears silently falling onto the table. "I tried," I said into the microphone. "I showed her the data. I sent her the analysis. But sometimes, Senator, people do not hear because they believe the story they tell themselves more than they believe the truth in the numbers. My sister built a beautiful story. She just forgot to build the foundation." The gavel banged again. The hearing was adjourned for recess. The room erupted into chaos as reporters shouted questions. I stood up and gathered my papers. I walked toward the side exit, trying to avoid the cameras. "Sage." I stopped. I turned around. Madison was standing in the aisle. Her lawyers were trying to usher her out the other way, but she had pulled free. She looked at me. Her face was a ruin of smeared mascara and grief. "You were good up there," Madison whispered. Her voice broke. "You were very professional." "I just told the truth, Madison," I said. "You saved a lot of people," she said, gesturing vaguely toward the gallery where the victims were now hugging each other. "You are the hero, and you destroyed everything I built. You burned it all down." I looked at her. I felt a profound sadness, but no guilt. "I didn't burn it down, Madison," I said softly. "I just pulled down the curtain. What was standing behind the curtain was the choice you made years ago." She stared at me. She opened her mouth to argue, to blame me again, but then she closed it. She knew. Deep down, she finally knew. "Goodbye, Sage," she whispered. She turned and let her lawyers lead her away. I watched her go. It was the last time I would see her as a free woman. I pushed open the heavy doors and stepped out onto the marble steps of the Capitol. The autumn air was crisp and cold. A horde of reporters was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. They saw me and started shouting my name, their cameras flashing like lightning. Ms. Paul, do you feel vindicated? Ms. Paul, are you planning to take over the company? Sage, look this way." I put on my sunglasses. I did not stop. I did not give a soundbite. I walked down the stairs, through the crowd, and onto the sidewalk. I hailed a cab and got in. I watched the white dome of the Capitol fade into the distance. 3 days later, I was back in my apartment. The silence was reclaiming my space. I sat at my desk with my laptop open. I logged into my bank account. The balance was staggering. It was the result of the put options, the small investment that had paid out 1,000 times over. It was enough money to buy a beach house. It was enough money to live in luxury for the rest of my life. I looked at the number. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like blood money. I opened a new tab. I navigated to the website of a newly formed nonprofit organization. It was a microfund designed to provide retraining grants and small business loans to former employees of failed tech startups. I clicked Donate. I entered an amount. It was 80% of the profit I had made from the HelioCore crash. I paused before hitting the final button. My father would have called me crazy. Madison would have called me weak. They would say I was throwing away my leverage. But I wasn't. I was making the only investment that actually mattered. I was investing in people who had been hurt by a lie. I was investing in my own conscience. I clicked Confirm. Transaction successful. I closed the laptop. I stood up and walked to the window. The sun was shining on the brick wall outside. It wasn't a glamorous view. It wasn't a penthouse. But it was mine. And for the first time in my life, I knew exactly what it was worth. Thank you so much for listening to this story about how truth is the only currency that never devalues. I would love to hear your thoughts on Sage's decision. Please comment down below and tell me where you are listening from, whether you are at home, on your commute, or taking a break at work. If you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and smash that hype button so we can share this story with even more people.